Before we begin, I would like to relay a minor news from NPR about something outrageous that happened in the US. This that you see here is a beautiful mural inside Grant Middle School in Michigan, commissioned to a high school student. Last week, during a school board meeting, unhinged parents accused the student to promote anti-Christian messages because of the various LGBTQ+ themes in the drawing, and to have discriminated against Christian beliefs by depicting the hand of God, which apparently they're ignorant about and believe it's witchcraft, and a mask that they say is Satan, causing the student to leave the room in tears. I won't stay here to explain how considering love a symbol of hatred shows absolutely no comprehension of Christian beliefs, and how considering everything that is not Christian anti-Christian is exactly why the US has a First Amendment protecting the freedom of religion. I want to focus the attention on how petty and revolting as an adult you are if you don yourself in faith to fiercely attack a teenager whose artwork portrays a message about love, care, and inclusion. Christian fundamentalists taking over school boards to spread the message of hatred have to be stopped. We all have to put a stop to this. And people must be held accountable for their hateful actions. Spread love, not hate. Welcome back. Let's start by talking about a recurring scandal in Japanese politics. And to do so, I have to introduce you to Yasukuni. The Yasukuni Jinja is a Shinto shrine built in Tokyo in 1869 by order of Emperor Meiji. The initial purpose of the shrine was to honor the memory of those who died in the Boshin War, which, along with the Satsuma Rebellion, were two civil wars in the early years of the Meiji era that saw the restoration to power of the imperial court and the fall of the Tokugawa shogunate. The purpose of the shrine was from the very beginning political, since it was, all in all, a monument to the imperial court's victory. Over the years, the shrine has been expanded to include those who died in basically every following war that Japan fought in, including the Sino-Japanese Wars and World War II. And here lies the controversy. The fact is that Yasukuni Shrine also honors the memory of 1,068 convicted war criminals, 14th of which are A-class, that is to say, criminals who were involved in either planning, preparing, initiating, or waging the war. On top of that, the Museum of the Shrine holds some exhibits on World War II that wants to convince the viewers that Japan was instigated by the US to attack Pearl Harbor, if I'm not mistaken over some preposterous oil excavation issue, and that Japan was invading other Asian countries only to export prosperity and technological advancement, never addressing the mass murders and war crimes that Japan committed. The shrine, therefore, is a monument to Japanese nationalism and revisionism, a sentiment that is still surprisingly present in a part of the older generations. The main issue is not much about the existence of said shrine, but around the fact that over the years, various politicians and prime ministers from various parties, and especially the LDP, either visited the shrine as private citizens or sent offerings. For a brief moment, it seemed that this newly acquired tradition was going to be phased out when, during his first term in office, Shinzo Abe only sent an offering in 2007 and all his 16 cabinet members refused to visit the shrine, with only one going in the end to avoid being the only time when no member of the government paid their respects on the anniversary of the Japanese surrender. But as Abe turned more and more nationalistic and extremist in his views, in his later terms, he started visiting the shrine as prime minister, in line with the most extreme factions of his own party. To give you an idea of how absurd the situation is, Hirohito, who was the emperor during World War II, stopped visiting Yasukuni Shrine because of the enshrinement in 1978 of war criminals. And neither of his successors, Akihito and Naruhito, have ever went there. I don't know if you realize, we're talking about the emperor, the pinnacle of Japanese nationalism, who doesn't visit a shrine because it's considered immoral, but the cabinet has no problem whatsoever visiting it. Anyways, the connection between this shrine and various prime ministers and members of the government has been a recurring issue in Japan's international affairs, aggravating the already tense diplomatic relationships with the victims of its imperialistic drive, mainly China and South Korea, but also with the United States. And now we come to the fact of the week. Fumio Kishida, sitting LDP Prime Minister of Japan, sending an offering to Yasukuni Shrine in occasion of its autumn festival, the Shukirei Taisai. While to the day of this recording, other members of the cabinet and a cross-party group of 90 lawmakers have visited the shrine in person, Kishida only sent a ceremonial tree called Masakaki. Questioned about the administration's view on the gesture, Chief Cabinet Secretary Hirokazu Matsuno declined to comment, but stated that Kishida performed this offering as a private citizen, although the Masakaki tree was sent with a board stating Prime Minister. These actions already stirred a swift response from China and South Korea, who criticized the act and invited Kishida to reflect on Japan's history of aggression. And if I can offer my 2 cents on the topic, I think this is a very serious issue. The grave precedent set by Shinzo Abe is another example of how easily people can be radicalized and how difficult it is to go back to normal afterwards. Japan is a very conservative and old country, and there are still generations who romanticize the war period and who would exacerbate Japanese nationalism and seclusion even more. The fact that, for instance, the group of lawmakers who visited the shrine comprised members of various parties shows us that the problem doesn't belong to a specific faction of the political spectrum, and rather, it is shared between some ideologies and it's even intergenerational, although in different percentages. Japan has a deep-seated and widespread sentiment of distrust and low-key racism towards foreigners, which is typical of Atlantic populations. And while this is just one example of it, Japan will have a lot of work to do if it wants to get rid of this problem. Now, where were we with the Unification Church scandal? Ah yes, a whole bunch of lawmakers and ministers disclosing their ties to the cult, forcing Kishida to replace a part of his cabinet. For more information regarding how this all began and why this church is better described as a cult, I invite you to go watch my previous video on the matter. Now, back to the news. During an extraordinary diet session on October 3rd, Kishida stated that he would face the voices about his relationship with the church and vowed to restore the trust of the general public, although he then proceeded to shift the attention on the suffering economy, talking about the weak yen, tourism, and inflation. October 4th was also Kishida's first year in office anniversary, and 2 weeks later we learned of a new Gigi poll conducted a few days later that tallied the approval rating of Kishida's cabinet at 27.4%. This isn't just the first time it slips under 30%, a threshold below which a government is considered in the danger zone, but also it's below the lowest figure his predecessor Yoshihide Suga ever got, which was 29%. The poll breaks down the major points of dissatisfaction, from Shinzo Abe's funerals to the rising prices to future expectations for this cabinet. But one of the driving issues continues to be Kishida's handling of the Unification Church fallout. Apparently, 67.6% of the responders considered his response unsatisfactory. Even among LDP supporters, the rate was 60.4%. And an NHK poll shows an even more dire situation, with 73% of the responders judging negatively Kishida's actions on the issue. In the meantime, an expert committee under the Consumer Affairs Agency submitted a recommendation for the investigation of the church to the Consumer Affairs Minister Taro Kono. According to them, the church might have violated legal provisions, taken actions that seriously damaged the public welfare, and conducted activities that go well beyond the scope of a religious organization, which would make possible to dissolve the cult under the Religious Corporations Law. However, this panel states cautions on the possibility of disbanding the church because of the constitutional right of freedom of religion. Considering the poll numbers and this document, this Monday Kishida decided to abandon his cautious stance and instructed the Education Minister Keiko Nagaoka to launch an investigation. This will be conducted under the so-called government's right to question the activities of a religious organization, which was implemented in this law in 1996 after the deadly attack to the Tokyo subway by the doomsday cult Om Shinrikyo. Nagaoka said that the ministry will set up a panel of experts on religion, legal matters, and religious corporations, and then it will ask approval from the Religious Corporations Council to avoid fears of unconstitutionality, which were the reasons that Kishida used so far to explain his cautious approach. The investigation will then proceed to ask reports of operations and management from the church, which could lead to its disbandment if there should be violations. But despite all this, there are a series of problems regarding the law and issues that would follow its application. First of all, under the Religious Corporations Law, authorities cannot question officials at the religious corporation's facilities without their consent, which hinders quite a lot the power of this committee. Moreover, a possible disbandment of the cult would mean that it would lose its status as a corporation, and therefore the related tax benefits, but it would not prohibit the organization to continue its religious activities. And although critics argued that the cult would have a tough time surviving without the tax breaks, the situation following a disbandment remains unpredictable. Even more so if you consider the cult's influence and ties to various politicians and public figures. Not only this might spell influence or even corruption over the investigation itself, which, let's remember, for now it stays political and will involve the judiciary only on the final ruling, but even if there was a disbandment, what will ensue is probably a fierce legal fight, and given how much radicalized the base of the church is, who knows, we might even see some extreme gestures from either the leaders or the followers. This disbandment itself could not even occur, being the Kishida administration still cautious about the implications on freedom of religion. What is sure is that we are already seeing the effects of this turmoil. The cult is already on the move and trying to silence the voices of those speaking against it. On October 7th, during a Foreign Correspondents Club news conference, a former member of the church in her 20s, who goes by the pseudonym of Sayuri Ogawa, was talking about how the cult cursed her and her parents to donate huge amounts of money. In the middle of the press conference, the club received faxes from both her parents, who are still followers, and the church, urging them to end the session and attempting to discredit Ogawa's character. In another instance, on October 12th, a Kochi Prefecture farmer named Tatsuo Hashida attended a hearing about the cult held jointly by opposition parties, and then spoke to the media about how he divorced from his wife 9 years ago because of the huge donations she made to the church, who even convinced her of selling a rice paddy because of an evil spirit residing there, and about his son, who was living with the mother and killed himself 2 years ago. On Tuesday, he told news reporters that on the 16th, a senior official of the cult, Hideyuki Teshigawara, wanted to talk to him in person about the matter, and after Hashida's refusal, Teshigawara presented himself at his home, demanded him to stop talking to the media, and would not leave the premises even after Hashida called the police. These actions confirmed the threatening and cult-like behavior of the Unification Church, and let's hope they play a role into its disbandment. At any rate, the timeline I previously illustrated clarifies how much all of this hesitancy and then touted government actions are primarily politically motivated. The religious corporation laws in question were already used to disband two other churches, the Om Shinrikyo, as I said before, and the Myokakuji Temple Group, another church accused of defrauding its followers. But never before this required a government investigation. In addition, this law has already been applied not only on criminally violent charges like for the Doomsday Cult, but also on fraud grounds. The Unification Church had already lost 2 civil lawsuits in 2016 and 2017, but no investigation or proposal of disbandment was ever suggested until now. And while the ruling LDP and the opposing CDP and Nippon Ishin no Kai parties agreed on Wednesday to create a joint panel in order to discuss a bill to help victims of this cult's fraud, Kishida's dismal poor rates are gathering momentum for LDP Secretary General Toshimitsu Motegi, who is solidifying his consent inside the party and whom many think will succeed Kishida at being Japan's Prime Minister. That is it for this week. I know this was a lot to take in, but these issues are extremely interesting to understand the workings of Japanese politics. As usual, thanks for watching, and if you liked the video, please leave a comment, like, and subscribe. See you next week!